you're going to learn how to build and host your very own custom API endpoints. And it's a lot easier than you think. For this example that we're going to be using in this episode is this LinkedIn researcher API endpoint. So we're going to build our own custom API endpoint that researches and finds LinkedIn profiles of our prospects. And we're just going to build out this very simple website where if we insert the name and the company name of the prospect, it'll use our own API to pull in the results. So stay tuned. This should be a good one. So we're going to build both a API server and the client. So like the website that we're actually calling and using the API with, because they kind of go hand in hand. Let's start with just setting up our basic API server. So I went to create an app and then choose a template, click on Python. I'm going to call it LinkedIn Finder API. And I'm going to create this app. And this is going to kick me off into a project. It's completely empty. It's Python. It's all set up with the assistant in a Replit. So we're going to keep it blank for now. And just a quick intro, we're going to use Serper for the research to actually search the web. Serper is just sort of like think of it like a Google API, raw inputs and raw outputs. So if you send in a search query, it's going to return basically what Google would. It's not like a LLM like Perplexity API would be. It's just raw Google data. And then we're going to hang on and maybe kick off that in a second for building our client or our website. Let's start off by getting the API call. So I'm going to actually query. I now have Super Whisper on my computer, and it's free to start as well. Actually, let's cancel. It's free to start as well, so you can download it for free and use it locally. But it's my favorite transcription tool lately. And I'm going to ask Perplexity, give me a basic FastAPI endpoint in Python that uses serper.dev to search for LinkedIn profile URLs. So my FastAPI endpoint will be called /find LinkedIn. And it will receive post requests, and the body parameters that it will expect will include first name, last name, company name. And all of those fields are optional in the body. And it will search Serper and then send back the potential URLs in the results if there are any. So there's definitely some things that we can clean up. Give me a basic FastAPI endpoint in Python that uses serper.dev to search for LinkedIn profiles. So my FastAPI endpoint, we can split this up. My FastAPI endpoint will be called find LinkedIn, and it will be receive post requests and body parameters that will include first name, last name, company name in the body. We're going to say that they're not optional. And we'll say, and company, we'll just say, we'll keep it there, and company name. Serper with a query like site LinkedIn.com name, company. Awesome. Find LinkedIn response. So this is the full scaffolding or idea. Quick breakdown. This is a quick hacky way. If you're not aware, if you put site : the name of the website, then Google will index or just pull out results that have that website domain or come from that website. And because Serper is just basically a Google API, we can use the same exact logic in there. And that's basically going to be the query. And so if the profile is available and out there, then it will basically go out and find that profile and URL. And just a quick note, this is like a completely okay way for scraping data is by just getting what Google indexes, because Google only indexes what that company or the owner of that website publicly makes available. And it's kind of a trade-off that the company does. It's like what data should they hide behind a login and what data can be, exposed to an index for the SEO bump. A lot of companies leave some of that data exposed for SEO purposes. For LinkedIn specifically, you can go into your privacy settings, and if you choose the most hardcore privacy settings where like you don't have a profile picture or anything public at all, then you won't show up in Google results. So anyone that we do, they won't show up in Google results. But any basic profile will show up because it's getting indexed by Google, because LinkedIn is optimizing to show up in as many Google results as possible so they become and drive more traffic to their website. And so that's a trade-off that companies do, and that kind of applies to basically all websites. And so we have the initial query, and this is basically it. I'm going to say, basically, this looks pretty good. The only thing that I want to double check, but I actually know because I'm familiar with Google and Serper API, is that this part is configured correctly. Does it use the right URL? Does it use the right payload here for the Serper call and just make sure that that's structured. So this is essentially our endpoint, and we're just wrapping another, endpoint or another API within the API, but we're manipulating it for our own use cases and specific use cases. So we're actually going to take this and I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to tell Replit Assistant, let's build a simple FastAPI endpoint that uses this code. And then that's it. Wow, that caught. I'm just going to actually go back and paste this all in, and then let that cook. Then I'm going to go back and I'm just going to ask Perplexity really simply, are you sure that the Serper call is formatted correctly and is up to date with the latest API documentation? There we go. It's going to go get it, double check it. Meanwhile, let's go back to Replit Assistant. And the wonderful part about Replit is it will automatically install and run any packages that you need. So I'm just going to go ahead, apply all, and that's it. We're going to go here, and these are squiggly reds because we just need to make sure to hit install on that blue button, and that should run everything. Just want to double check. It should show up in console or shell. There we go. It's still kind of loading up, and there, it automatically installed everything. It's running the server. Everything looks good. Sweet. So it gave us a little confirmation message. We have the FastAPI running. And so this is our, basic API server. We have our find LinkedIn, which is the main one. And then you can see we have a get request here. So it's at the root. So since we're at the endpoint, it's giving us that little message. So it's kind of confirming that we're all up and running and everything's good to go. Perfect. This is actually a really good time. Let's just go double check that Serper. It doesn't look like they changed anything. And geographic, it just added more things to the query compared to what it gave us earlier. So I actually think it's all good. We might want to reduce the number of results that we get from Serper, but we'll get back to that later. Yeah, didn't really add anything that we don't have in here. We're going to just have to test it in a little bit, but let's build our client to test it. The only other thing is now I see, it gives us a warning, make sure that you have secrets, and we have to add that secret in there. So anytime you see OS get environ or environ os.environ, then these are the secrets that we need to make sure we add to our project. I'm going to add my Serper API key in here. We're going to go ahead and go back to Serper, copy, and paste the value in. You can add that in. Boom. And sweet. We should be good to go. Let's just double check. We didn't change any of the code, so it should be running fine. Now let's create our little simple website. Build me a simple, clean looking internal website tool in React that lets me put in someone's name and company name. And that gets sent to this API. And I said this API because it kind of let it hanging. And I'm going to say, I'm going to bring my base URL. And also our main endpoint. So we have our base URL and the main endpoint. We don't want to do any of those options. This is usually used for if you want to copy the page content. So like if you're giving Replit agent some access to some documentation or content on the internet, you can use it or have it go take a screenshot. You can also attach screenshots there. I don't know why Super Whisper made this super weird looking code. Build me a simple, clean looking website. It made everything a variable. Clean looking internal website. I think it was the in React that made it set off. Okay, that lets me put someone's name and company name and then get sent to this API as a post request with I've attached. Let me also say I have attached the relevant code for this endpoint here. So this is a superpower, and why we started with the API to start. It makes it so much easier. Like if you just give it the exact endpoint that you're working with, so our own code, it will know, hey, I know the body I have to send from this website from the client to make sure I use this correctly. And I'm just going to click start building. So now let's get our little simple website. I'm just going to go with build the initial prototype. Here we go. And so obviously I'm going to fast forward this video until we're done. We'll be right back. Okay, great. We have our first result and we can honestly start testing it. Let's give a shot here. So you want to open console because anything that gets printed here or errors out in our server, number one, we're still running in like this dev mode. So we gave this base URL to our client and it set it up and connected it. So when we hit search, it's going to call this base URL and our main endpoint here, find LinkedIn. And this is going to be the moment of truth where we will want to take a look at the console and then have a look. So, and we might also want to open the console in here in case there's any errors on the client end. We're going to search for myself and we're going to say Replit and search for it. Oh, wow. Okay. Whoops. So for some reason it got kind of cut off, but it gave us a 200. So we got a 200 result. We got a 200 okay over here in our server. And I mean, the only thing is, let's ignore this little assistant, open this again. And it looks like it just doesn't have a place for it to display the results. I'm going to say when we get a successful response from the API call, can we display the results on the page? There we go. Go think through it and add that in. And then once we get these results showing up on our client, I mean, we basically have all the main components, but the other thing I want to add is I want to show how you can secure your endpoint back on your API. Obviously, you know, let's say this is our own website that we own and we're okay with calling our endpoint and using up our Serper credits. But if anyone else finds this URL, or when we deploy it, if they find the URL and they guess the endpoint name of find LinkedIn, which is pretty easy to do, we don't want to let them just like call it and burn up our credits so that they can go find all the LinkedIn URLs on our dime. So I'm going to show you how you can secure it in just a second once we have this. Alrighty. Let's do it again. And search for a name. Okay. Pretty cool. And it found me. So great. We have a LinkedIn searcher and we have it working on our own API. This is pretty cool. So we have our own running server here, and now we are going to secure it so that only this website or any of our future websites are able to use our find LinkedIn API endpoint. So quick breakdown. We've done everything from set up the FastAPI server. We have our main endpoint here, the root one. We have the server running in this Python environment, and we have our custom find LinkedIn API endpoint. And we also have our client that is making the calls to it. So let me also show how the client is making those calls. So let's say, find me the place where we are making calls to the find LinkedIn endpoint. And I should have super whispered there, but the show goes on. So this is just a basic Q&A question. And by the way, like this is a really useful way to use the blue one, the assistant, is just Q&A on finding files or finding relevant code, just to explore everything. So it says it is done over here in server routes. So if I open a new tab and I just do server routes, it will start to search it. So if I search that same file name that's right here, then I can go and find it. And you can see it's making the call to the API in here. So it's making the call right in here. This line right here that says await fetch, that's obviously our base URL and the find LinkedIn endpoint. So there's two things. One, anyone can make the same call because there's no security, there's no authorization header. And then number two is we have to also keep in mind that when we leave this REPL, like if we hit stop, it will no longer work. Or if we were to close a tab, it won't work because every time we hit run, this is all running actually in a cloud hosted and ran by Replit. So it actually costs money, at least marginally, to just even be running it like this. So in order for it to stay up and for us to continuously use it on our website, no matter what, and have our endpoint stay up 24/7, we have to host it. So let me actually show you while the server is down. So if I hit stop, I'm going to go back to our client and I'm going to do the same API call and we're actually going to get an error. And I'm going to go to the console to showcase that. It's probably going to give us a 404 or a 401. Boom. So see, it failed. It actually says a 500 error because it's like something's wrong on their end, on the developer end. Whoever made this find LinkedIn endpoint messed up. But the thing is, it's like it actually isn't running. So I'm going to go back and we can actually rerun it. And now we get our results again. So that's a key. So we want to host it, but before we host it, let's double check the security. I know I keep saying that, but now finally, let's start a new chat for the assistant. And let's say I want to add some basic authorization checks on my find LinkedIn endpoint in this API. I want to just do a simple check on the headers for an authorization or a bearer token. Can you set that up for me? And even if we had, because we started with the Python template, it doesn't have the assistant as of now. But even if we did have the assistant, I would definitely make this type of request the agent. We don't have the purple agent, but I would still make this type of request. If it's just like a tiny tweak, like adding security or debugging, I always start with the assistant. And as you get more technical, I always use the assistant over the agent. So this is what it's going to give us. And it looks like it's doing it correctly. It's basically adding, if you can see this green stuff, it's adding this verify token function, and it's adding it to back down here in the function for our find it LinkedIn endpoint. It's adding that as like a dependency to calling that function. So what that means is basically anytime we make the call to find LinkedIn, it's going to depend on verify token with this little line, and verify token is going to double check our API header. So I'll go into what that all means in a second. So you can see it actually tells us those same instructions here. It says you'll need to set up an API token in your environment variables called API token. And I'm going to do that. We're going to go call it API token. And we're going to do it like, I would recommend going to a password manager or some other like generator to generate something that's like secret and like actually secure and like a bunch of letters and numbers. But for the simplicity of this video, we're going to say our secret key to call our API is just going to be 123 ABC. So that's our super secret value. So that's stored here locally. That's stored here in the server. And basically what it's saying is now to use the API, your requests are going to have to include this header. So it's going to have to include this header authorization and then the string bearer and whatever the token is. So in this case, it's going to be the actual contents of this API token, which is 123 ABC. So let's go back here. So the way that it works is it's going to go to verify token. It's going to pull 123 ABC locally and check it. And if it doesn't match, if the request contains any other string, it's going to deny it and give a 401 to that request. So let's stop. Let's rerun our server. So our API is running again. And the only thing we've changed since we've last tried out our client is that we've added that verify function. So let's actually see what happens when we try to call it now with no authorization header in our request. Boom. We'll try it again. We actually get a 500. So it gave us a 500 because boom, and it's actually denying us. So what we have to do is actually give it context and say we're going to paste over just like the verify line. So this chunk of code. Okay, so it's erroring out when we send, we get 500. So now we have to ask it to add an authorization header. So let's say we also have to add the secret. So the same secret password that we're using in here in the server API token, we also have to give that to the client or any website that's also going to be using our API, because it's going to use it to send it to all the requests so that when it sends requests, they can match up in here and both the server and the client can tell each other like, yeah, you're authorized because you know the same password that I do. So I'm going to say internal API token, and I'm going to make it the same exact thing. 123 ABC. Again, use a password generator or something else to get a more secret value, but for the simplicity of this demo, I'm going to use it. I'm going to tell it, so now our find LinkedIn endpoint requires an authorization bearer token. I've stored the secret value in this variable. We need to pass it through in the headers securely when we make requests to the find LinkedIn endpoint. And I'm going to say here. So when I say like this variable, sometimes I leave things out because it's like really hard to, in transcription apps, to say what the name of variables and like code is. I know I can add some prompts in Super Whisper to make it easier, but I haven't done it yet. So now our find LinkedIn endpoint, and we should format it to be correct. Again, it doesn't do great for function naming, file calling, and transcription apps. But okay, so now our find LinkedIn endpoint requires an authorization bearer token. We need to pass it through in the headers securely when we make requests to the find LinkedIn endpoint. This is good enough. And so now the assistant is going to go edit code in the client so that when we make requests to our server and to our find LinkedIn API, it's going to include the right token. Here we go. Awesome. And it's really good that it's calling this secret within a server route, because when we're working with our website and our client, we don't want to be fetching secrets variables that shouldn't be public in the client files. So anything that started with like a client/file name, be careful. Make sure that it's okay. It's like a publishable key. Most of the time it's not. If you're adding anything in secrets, most of the time you want to keep that stuff secret. So you want to run it in a server file. So this looks good. So you can see it added this little part in the headers that will include the token internal API token. So it's going to grab the value from this key and pop it in to the authorization header. So I'm going to apply it. It's added it. And now we're going to just stop and then run it again so we can preview it. Now here's a moment of truth. Now that we have our password, essentially, will our request go through? Boom. So now it went through. And actually, just to double check and to showcase again, we're going to edit the internal token. Instead of it saying 123 ABC, I'm just going to have it say 123. So it's the wrong password. I'm going to update it. So now let's run it again. And sometimes it's a little tricky because secrets is kind of a variable that could get like cached and stored for a little bit. So I just want to stop and rerun it so it doesn't get cached. And when we search, boom, see, now that we have the wrong value in our password, it's just 123. It doesn't allow us to send requests to that endpoint that we have. Let me go add it again. 123 ABC. And like I said, sometimes because this is like a local stored thing, we want to stop and run it again. And let's give it a shot. Now that we have the right password again. Success. See? So that is basically the basic level of security. There's many other ways to secure an API, but at the very least, you want to secure your webhooks or any APIs that you set up on your own in this format. The last thing that we're going to do to wrap up this video is, like I mentioned, when we hit stop or if we close this in Replit, we can't keep running it for free like this. We have to actually host it so that it can be on there 24/7. Something like this shouldn't really cost that much money because it's just doing little queries. Most of your costs are going to come from Serper if you really start to get popular. Running this compute shouldn't be expensive at all. So what we're going to do is actually deploy and host this endpoint. So we're going to choose autoscale, and think of this, for APIs, you're either going to do reserve VM or autoscale. Reserve VM is really if you want to use anything that's like in production or going to be really public, or something like a Slack bot that needs to constantly listen to traffic. Reserve VMs could start at like $6 a month. So it's not expensive at all. But what that means is that your machine is always going to be listening 24/7 for requests. On autoscale, you only pay for what gets used. So if it goes down, like if you don't have any traffic at all, let's say at 2 a.m. your time, because all your users are in the same time zone, let's assume, then it spins down to 0. You're not paying anything. And then when that first user comes back online at 6 a.m., then their very first request is going to boot up the machine and have it, reawaken. And that request might take a little bit longer for that user to experience. So the LinkedIn results might take a little bit longer, maybe like a half second longer. And so that's what you're paying for, is like the lack of performance of the machine spinning down and spinning back up. And so if you're not using anything like WebSockets or like building a bot that needs to be constantly up and spinning, then you can use autoscale. And definitely this is like also the recommended way for any, starter projects that you're just prototyping and going along with. Usually the defaults are set and good, and we could call this whatever we want. I'm just going to go with this basic one. Once we deploy it, we're able to add our own custom domains, but this all looks good. I'm going to go ahead and deploy this, and this is now going to get deployed into a fully hosted 24/7 production URL. So let's give it a second. I'll be right back once it's done deploying. Awesome. So it has just succeeded in deploying to production. So this is our new production URL. So why does this matter again? So you can see this is not running at all. Like we don't have this. If we go to web view, nothing's here. But if we hit run, this dev URL, this is like our local URL. So you can see the local URL here, or if you type in networking in Replit, you're able to see the local and the local port that you're using. And what I mean by local is because Replit is all in the cloud. So it's technically, this endpoint is still up in the cloud. But this is a dev environment. You can see it's got replit.dev. So when we hit stop and we try to make a call from here, if it's stopped, if it's not running, then it's not going to send a request. So let's try to send a request. It's still on the dev URL, and you can see it failed. It failed to fetch results because it's not running. So let's go back to the assistant. And when we say, let's do a new chat just to ask it a Q&A. Where do we make a call? Let's use, where are we making calls to the find LinkedIn API endpoint? And let's just go ahead and show why this matters. So it's currently just still searching. It is currently making the request to, you can see right there, the replit.dev. So it's not running and hosting. But now that we've deployed it, we can actually swap it out. So we can grab this URL. I'm going to click open, and you can see we're not getting a 404. It's sending us a message that we have at the root path. I can grab this new base URL and go back over to our website and say, can you swap the replit.dev base URL with this new base URL for the find LinkedIn API call? And then right in there, I'm going to put it in and then paste it in. So grab this again, paste it in. There we go. And let's make sure it's just got to go to this same exact file. Probably should have called it out like server. You have to do it in server.routes, but it should be smart enough. Yep, it went into server.routes. And you can see it swapped out that dev URL for the production one that's now deployed. We can apply all changes. Now, when we go back in, let's rerun our website. Remember the last call that we did was to replit.dev, which is not running. It's not running, so just to prove, not running at all. The only thing we have is our production domain. And so now this call should go to that new replit.app production domain. Replit. Boom. And we have now gotten results from our very own API that is hosted up in the cloud and in production. And so now we could take this API server, we can continue to expand it. We can make this a really refined research workflow and use it across other apps and internal tools that we build like this. So you are now an API developer. Let me know what you think of this video. If any questions come up, put them in the comments and I will continue to serve up as much as I can. Yeah, have a great day. Hope you enjoyed it.